Hi, welcome. So today we're going to talk about The Reader, which is a novel by the German writer Bernhard Schlink. It was originally published in 1995 with the German title Der Vorleser. The English translation, which was done by Carol Brown Janey, came out in 1997. And well, I kind of read it in German, but I also read parts of it in translation. I had to stop at several points to kind of translate things or look up words that I didn't understand. It was kind of like my first experience trying to read in German. It was only partially successful. But of course, the novel is widely available and very popular in English translation. There's also an English language movie adaptation from 2008, which was adapted by David Hare and directed by Stephen Daldry and starring Kate Winslet, Ralph Fiennes, and the German actor David Cross. But in this video, I will only talk about the novel, with no spoilers. So The Reader is divided into three parts. The first part of the novel is set in 1958 in a city in West Germany. At that time, the protagonist, Michael Berg, is a 15-year-old boy who one day meets a 36-year-old woman named Hannah Schmitz. Without getting into any details or spoiling anything, the two of them, Michael and Hannah, have a brief yet intense sexual affair. I'm actually going to say very little about parts 2 and 3 of the novel. The only thing I'm going to say about the plot of parts 2 and 3 is that in them, Michael is already an adult and he's struggling to come to terms with his country's history, specifically with the Holocaust, and also the role that people from the previous generation, like his parents, but more importantly, Hannah, played in that. I think that's really all you need to know about the plot if you haven't read the novel yet. In preparation for this review, I read a few reviews that came out in different media outlets in the English-speaking world when the book first came out, and they all speak about the plot in a lot more detail. So it is possible that if you've read any of those reviews, even if you haven't read the novel yet, you will know a lot of what happens. Also, that applies, of course, if you've seen the movie. I have actually watched the movie, but only once, and when I read this novel, I realized that I had forgotten all about it. But let's go back to the book. So I want to talk about the tone in this novel because it is incredibly sparse. In this novel, the author goes straight to the point all the time, and he doesn't let anything, any detail that is irrelevant get in the way of the story that he wants to tell. So Schlink only goes into detail when the details are relevant to the story, but to the story that he wants to tell. I'll give you an example of that. So when Michael is an adult in parts 2 and 3, we just get the information we need to understand what he's been up to in the time that is not covered by the novel. But we just get that, some information in a paragraph or two about what he's been doing, where he's at, why he is where he is, why he thinks what he thinks, why he's interested in the things he's interested in. We just get that in a paragraph or two, and then the story proceeds as it had and focuses on the relationship between him and Hannah. In fact, the three parts of the novel are three very specific times in the change in relationship between these two main characters, and the rest is completely irrelevant. I think this story should be read as a parable. I saw that really clearly here, and I think in this novel, Michael stands for the new generation of Germans who were born after the horrors of the Third Reich and have to deal with recent history, but a recent history that is the history of their country, but it's not a history that they were a part of. They were born after the end of the war, after the fall of Nazism, but in a way, at least by generation, they are a result of that. And they have to come to terms with that and deal with that. And then the character of Hannah stands for the generation who actually lived during the Nazi era. So we have Michael trying to come to terms with what had happened before he was born, and also the kind of country that was left after that. And also that generation has to judge its parents' generation. Of course, what complicates things for Michael here is his relationship with Hannah, because it is personal. So later in the novel, he's torn between condemning and understanding her. Something that is very important in this novel, both symbolically but also in terms of the plot, is that at different times in the novel, Mikhail has to read out loud to Hannah, and he does that several times. He does that as a child, and he will go back to doing that as an adult. And that's really significant and important. And of course, that's where the title of this novel comes from. The character of Hannah is portrayed as an incredibly ignorant woman, and I won't go into specifics about that, but she's incredibly ignorant. Of course, the problem is that she stands in the novel, she's meant to stand for this whole generation of Germans, and that complicates things because the novel seems to say that a lot of Germans were, or the German people as such, not the army or the government, but the actual people were ignorant, they were naive, they didn't really know what was going on, and that is very problematic, of course. But if we just think about Hannah specifically as a character and not a stand-in in this parable about German history, if we just think about Hannah as a character, does her ignorance skews the role she played during the Holocaust? Or would that just be a cop-out? This is quite challenging because I'm trying to talk about things in a way that would make sense to people whether they have read the novel or not, and at the same time trying not to spoil the novel for those people who haven't read it yet. And I hope I'm doing an okay job with that. If I had to say what this novel is about, I wouldn't say that it's a love story between a boy and a woman, or then later a younger man and an older woman, or anything like that. I would say that this novel is about history and memory. And I think it's important also to say that the novel is told by Mikhail. So the book, this novel, The Reader, is about him. It's not about Hannah, it's about him, it's about his generation and his personal and generational struggle with his country's history, which is personified in Hannah, who is someone he loves. So people may love their country, but they also have to deal with the horrific past, which is very recent. There is also a secret at the center of this story. Hannah has a secret. She works really hard to keep it a secret. Her secret, however, is not hard to work out, even in the first part of the novel. If you look for clues, it's not really hard to find out. But even if you find out what it is, or if you already know it before you read this novel because most reviews talk about it, or because you've watched the movie, what you need to realize is that Mikhail himself only discovers Hannah's secret in part 2 of the novel. And that is when he meets her again, now as an adult. Also in that second part of the story, whether we had worked out Hannah's secret before or not, only in that second section is when we realized just how ashamed Hannah is about her secret and how far she's willing to go, or how much she's willing to suffer in order to prevent her secret from coming to light. The Reader is a propulsive and easy novel to read. It is very engaging. It is true that the ending of the novel can be a bit abrupt, can seem to come out of nowhere, but you know, thinking about it after finishing the book, I don't know how else the novel could have ended. The ending seems to be the obvious ending, but I personally didn't see it coming. I'm sure a lot of readers will see it coming. I didn't. I was okay with it. Felt a bit abrupt, but you know, that's how life is a lot of the time. And yeah, the whole thing works for me. Why did I come to this novel? Well, it is very famous. It has been on my TBR for many years, but I got to it finally this month because I want to improve my German. So I want to start reading books in German, books that were originally written in German, and I heard or read somewhere that The Reader wasn't that difficult to read. And it is true. But of course, that's not why I recommend it. I never recommend a book because it's easy to read. I actually ended up enjoying this novel a lot. I find a lot of this novel very memorable. I keep thinking about it and also think that I will reread it again in the future. And I think the way the story is told is very effective. As I said earlier, the novel has 3 parts, and I have to say that my favorite parts were 1 and 3. Why do I think that part 2 is not as strong? Well, it's a very personal thing, very subjective. I don't think part 2 is bad at all. I think it's very good. I think it's just as good as 1 and 3, but I enjoy 1 and 3 more because part 2 is essentially a long courtroom drama. Not the whole part, but most of it. And I have something against courtroom dramas. They're not the kind of thing I enjoy reading or watching, but a lot of people do, so you might love it. And also, it's important here to notice that the author, Schlink, is a law professor, so I have no doubt that that aspect of the novel is solid. I just happen not to enjoy courtroom dramas. But that is just part of the middle section of the novel. It's not even the whole middle section. But I enjoy more the parts that were about exploring the relationship between Mikhail and Hannah. But what do you think? Let me know if you're going to read this novel based on my review, or if you've read it before and have some thoughts that you'd like to share. I'd love to hear from you. Take care, and I'll see you again very soon. Bye.